At 5 a.m. in New York, the sky is standing on a threshold. The sun is at 29 degrees Pisces, the very last degree of the zodiac's final sign. Saturn has just stepped into Pisces at 0 degrees, beginning a new cycle in the same waters the sun is about to leave. Mercury and Venus are also in Pisces, softening perception and dissolving sharp edges. Meanwhile, the moon is in Aries at 10 degrees. Neptune has newly entered Aries, joined by Chiron. Mars and Jupiter move through Cancer, steady and protective. Pluto continues its slow work in Aquarius. This is not loud astrology. It doesn't crash in. It shifts the ground quietly beneath you. When the sun reaches the final degree of Pisces, there is often a sense of something completing at a very subtle level. Not an obvious ending, more like the last page of a chapter you didn't realize you were finishing. It can feel like a quiet exhale in the background of your life. A realization that certain emotional patterns, certain roles, certain coping strategies have run their course. At the same time, the moon in Aries and Neptune, newly in Aries, introduce a spark. Aries does not linger in reflection for long. It senses something and wants to move. It feels the impulse to begin, even if the direction is not fully mapped out yet. So the emotional tone of today is layered. Pisces slows you down. Aries prepares you to step forward. Saturn entering Pisces adds weight and maturity. It asks for structure around what you feel. You may notice this as a subtle inner shift, a tension between wanting to rest and wanting to act, a sense that you cannot keep drifting, but you are not quite ready to sprint either. This is a moment between dissolving and deciding. The title, Sun Enters Pisces, slowing down before defining direction, captures that perfectly. Before direction becomes clear, the system slows. Before movement becomes confident, something inside you recalibrates. The sky today reflects that recalibration. It does not push you. It invites you to notice that something old is ending quietly, and something new is asking for a first, simple step. When the sun lingers at the final degree of Pisces and Saturn steps into the same sign, the shift often begins in the body long before it becomes a clear thought. You might wake up feeling emotionally full rather than physically exhausted. Not drained in the usual way, but saturated, as if your nervous system has been holding too many open loops. Conversations replaying in the background, old memories surfacing without invitation, future possibilities running in quiet simulation. Pisces energy is highly permeable. With Mercury and Venus also in Pisces, perception becomes soft but porous. You may find yourself picking up on the emotional tone of a room immediately, reading more into a short text than what is written, sensing tension in a meeting even if no one names it. The body often registers this first, a slight tightness in the solar plexus when you scroll through emails, a subtle heaviness across the shoulders, like you are carrying something that is not entirely yours. A shorter breath when someone's name appears on your screen. A mild pressure behind the eyes, not from lack of sleep, but from too much emotional processing. These are early signals, not problems. Data your nervous system is handing you before your mind catches up. Saturn entering Pisces adds another layer. It can create a feeling of gravity in your emotional field. You may become more aware of what you have been absorbing, more conscious of the cost of constantly scanning the environment. The question shifts from, how do I manage all this, to, why am I managing all this in the first place? At the same time, the moon in Aries introduces a very different sensation. Aries energy moves through the body like a quick spark. It can show up as restlessness in the legs, a faster heartbeat when you think about a decision, a sudden urge to stand up to move, to send the message instead of rewriting it again. So you may feel two rhythms at once. Pisces slows your inner tempo. Aries quickens your impulse. You might notice this mid-morning. You're sitting with something that has been bothering you for weeks. You feel it in your chest, a low-grade tension that never fully leaves. Under Pisces, you feel the emotional weight clearly. Under Aries, you feel the almost physical urge to act. It might be as small as saying, "I can't commit to that," or as simple as deleting an app that has been draining you. The body leans forward before the mind has fully justified it. Chiron in Aries adds sensitivity around self-assertion. If you have old wounds connected to speaking up or taking up space, even small acts of self-advocacy can feel charged. Your throat may tighten when you try to say no. Your stomach may flutter before you send an honest reply. That discomfort is not a sign to retreat. It is a sign that the body is stepping into new behavior. Today is not about solving everything. It is about noticing these early signals, the slight contraction, the quickening pulse, the moment your breath shifts. Because before direction becomes clear in the mind, it becomes clear in the nervous system. As the day unfolds, this internal saturation and spark begin to show up in very practical ways. You might notice it first in your work rhythm. You sit down to focus, but your mind keeps drifting to unresolved conversations. Not because you're distracted, but because Pisces energy is still processing. You may reread the same email 3 times, not because it's complicated, but because you're trying to feel what's underneath it. Mercury and Venus in Pisces can blur communication lines. You might assume someone is disappointed when they're simply neutral. You might hesitate to send something because you're imagining how it will land emotionally. There can be a subtle tendency to overinterpret. At the same time, the Aries moon doesn't have patience for endless loops. Around mid-morning or early afternoon, you may hit a moment where you're tired of circling the same thought. You've rewritten the message, you've rehearsed the conversation in your head, and suddenly there's a clean impulse. Just say it plainly. This is where daily life meets the sky. Maybe you've been tolerating a small but persistent irritation at work, a recurring meeting that leaves you drained, a colleague who subtly oversteps. Under Pisces, you feel the emotional cost more clearly. Under Aries, you feel the urge to adjust it. Not dramatically, not confrontationally, just directly. You might block time on your calendar. You might clarify a boundary in one sentence. You might stop volunteering for something that no longer feels aligned. Mars and Jupiter in Cancer deepen this pattern in a different area of life. Cancer energy is protective. It cares about emotional safety and sustainability. So you may find yourself more aware of what feels nourishing and what feels depleting at home. Maybe you look around your space and suddenly want to reorganize it, not for aesthetics, but for comfort. Maybe you decide to cook instead of ordering out, or to text someone you trust instead of scrolling. These aren't grand gestures. They're subtle course corrections. You may also notice that decision-making feels different today. Not easier exactly, but more honest. The fog has thinned enough that you can sense when something is a yes and when it is a no. And that clarity might surprise you. Late afternoon can bring sharper edges. The moon in Aries reacts quickly. A comment that normally wouldn't register might sting. An email may feel more abrupt than intended. Chiron in Aries suggests that some of these reactions are layered, present moment meeting past memory. In those moments, daily life becomes a mirror, not dramatic, just precise. Do you fire back? Or do you feel the tightening in your chest and choose your tone on purpose? This is where the opportunity of the day lives, not in avoiding discomfort, but in recognizing it as feedback. You are being shown in real time where you've been overextending emotionally and where you're ready to define direction more clearly. Not through a major life decision, through a series of small, grounded choices. One honest reply, one protected hour, one conversation handled with less overthinking and more clarity. That is how this transit touches daily life. Quietly, practically, in the ordinary moments where awareness turns into behavior. At the center of today is a very specific pattern. Pisces invites you to feel everything. Aries asks you to act on one thing. That tension is the core dynamic of the day. With the Sun at the final degree of Pisces and Mercury and Venus also in Pisces, emotional awareness is heightened. You can sense what is off. You can feel what is heavy. You can detect subtle misalignments in conversations, in commitments, in your own energy. But awareness alone can become overwhelming. That's where the Aries moon shifts the pattern. Aries doesn't want to drown in emotional nuance. It wants movement. It wants direction. It wants one clear step. So the pattern of the day is this: emotional saturation turning into selective action. You might feel a build-up in the morning, a sense of carrying too much, too many micro-adjustments to other people's moods, too many internal negotiations, too many "it's fine" moments that aren't actually fine. Then somewhere midday something clicks. Not dramatic. Just a clean internal line. I'm not doing this the same way anymore. This is not about blowing up your life. It's about shortening the gap between what you feel and what you do. For some, this will look like sending the message you've been overthinking. For others, it will be choosing not to engage in a draining back and forth, or declining something without an elaborate explanation. The Aries moon cuts through. It doesn't ask for perfection, it asks for honesty. At the same time, Pisces reminds you to check the source of your impulse. Are you acting from clarity or from overwhelm? Are you setting a boundary because it's true for you or because you're emotionally flooded? The pattern requires both. Feel deeply enough to know what's real. Act simply enough to prevent stagnation. There is also a subtle theme of tempo. Pisces slows your internal clock. Aries speeds up your behavioral response. If you try to move at someone else's pace today, you may feel friction. If you ignore the impulse to act entirely, you may feel restless. The key is deliberate choice. One clear action that reflects what you already know emotionally, not 5 new commitments, not a dramatic announcement, just one movement that aligns with the emotional truth you've been circling for weeks. This is the shift from endless processing to embodied direction. It's not loud, it's not glamorous, but it is clean. And that clean movement is what prevents emotional fog from turning into emotional fatigue. To understand why this pattern is so strong today, you have to look at how the elements are shifting. The Sun is finishing its journey through Pisces at 29 degrees. The final stretch of a water cycle that has been about feeling, dissolving, and processing. Saturn has just entered Pisces at 0 degrees, adding structure and weight to that same emotional landscape. Mercury and Venus are still in Pisces, keeping perception intuitive, porous, and emotionally attuned. But at the same time, the Moon is in Aries. Neptune has just entered Aries. Chiron is in Aries. This is water meeting fire. For years, Neptune in Pisces amplified sensitivity. It blurred edges, it softened identities, it encouraged introspection. Many people have spent a long stretch learning to sit with uncertainty, to question old roles, to feel what had been numbed out. That phase wasn't passive, it was preparatory. Now, with Neptune newly in Aries, The tone shifts from internal awareness to embodied impulse. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. It doesn't reflect endlessly, it initiates. When Neptune moves into that territory, intuition no longer floats quietly in the background. It starts pressing for movement. Chiron in Aries deepens this. It highlights wounds around independence and self-definition, where you hesitate to assert yourself, where you fear being too much or too direct. Under this sky, those edges become more visible, not to shame you, but to show you where growth is ready to become behavioral. Saturn entering Pisces adds another layer. Saturn is about responsibility and maturity. In Pisces, that responsibility is emotional, not in the sense of carrying everything, but in discerning what belongs to you. So the pattern of emotional saturation turning into selective action isn't random. It reflects a larger elemental shift. Water has been teaching you to feel. Fire is now asking you to move. And because the sun is at the very end of Pisces, there is a sense of closure around how you have been handling your emotions. Some strategies that worked before may feel outdated. Over-processing, over-accommodating, over-explaining. The sky is not demanding a dramatic reinvention. It is asking for a subtle recalibration. You slow down long enough to feel what is true. Then you define direction in one clean way. That is how water and fire cooperate, not by cancelling each other out, but by letting awareness become action and letting action be informed by awareness. There's an old story many people carry, especially those who are emotionally aware. The story says, if you feel deeply, you must wait longer. If you are sensitive, you must be careful. If you are intuitive, you should keep observing until everything is clear. This sky gently challenges that narrative. The years of emotional fog were not a sign that you were lost. They were a period of refinement. You learned to notice your triggers. You learned to name your patterns. You learned to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. But somewhere along the way, sensitivity may have turned into hesitation. You may have started to believe that being thoughtful meant being slow, that being compassionate meant absorbing more than you should, that being aware meant constantly analyzing before moving. With the sun finishing Pisces and Saturn beginning there, structure forms around your sensitivity. It becomes less about feeling everything and more about discerning what is yours. And with the moon, Neptune and Chiron in Aries, a new layer emerges. Maybe strength doesn't look like handling everything quietly anymore. Maybe strength looks like a simple, direct sentence. Maybe growth doesn't look like endlessly understanding your past. Maybe it looks like making one different choice today. There is also a subtle reclaiming of identity here. Pluto in Aquarius has been reshaping collective ideas of power and belonging. You may feel less attached to roles that once defined you. The reliable one, the calm one, the accommodating one. You are not being asked to abandon empathy. You are being invited to give empathy direction. Sensitivity is not weakness, it is data. And when combined with Aries' willingness to act, it becomes clarity in motion. This reframing is quiet but important. You are not behind because you slowed down. You are not indecisive because you felt deeply. You were gathering information, watching, learning, refining. Now you get to use it. Not in a dramatic, identity-defining way, just in a small, grounded shift. A cleaner boundary, a more honest tone, a choice that aligns with what you already know. That is not abandoning who you are, it is embodying it. So how do you move through a day like this without forcing it, without overcomplicating it? First, recognize that you don't have to resolve the entire emotional chapter the sun is closing. The sun at 29 degrees Pisces suggests completion, But completion does not mean urgency, it means awareness. Something has run its course. That realization alone is enough for now. Let the slowing down be intentional. If your inner tempo feels quieter than the world around you, honor that. Pisces energy needs space to settle. You may not think as sharply first thing in the morning. You may need a few extra minutes before answering messages. Instead of labeling that as procrastination, consider that your system is integrating. Then, when the Aries impulse shows up, meet it consciously. Notice the moment between awareness and action. When you feel the urge to respond, pause for one full breath. Feel your feet on the floor. Relax your jaw. Then decide if the action comes from clarity or from reactivity. Mars and Jupiter in Cancer support actions that protect what feels emotionally safe. If you feel motivated to protect your time, your space, or your energy, that is aligned with the sky. You don't need to justify that instinct. You can simply follow it in a grounded way. Late in the day, if something triggers you quickly under the Aries moon, resist the urge to interpret it as failure. Quick reactions are information. If your chest tightens or your voice sharpens, that is your body signaling that something matters. Instead of suppressing it or exploding with it, hold it for a moment. Ask yourself quietly, what boundary is this pointing toward? Integration today is not about big decisions. It is about coherence. If you feel tired, rest earlier without guilt. If you feel a steady nudge to act, take one small step. If you feel emotionally flooded, reduce input instead of pushing through. The goal is not productivity. It's coherence. You don't need a checklist. You need attentiveness. Slowing down does not mean stalling. It means allowing your inner truth to surface clearly enough that when you do move, it feels clean. That is enough integration for one day. As the day comes to a close, the larger arc of the sky becomes easier to sense. The sun at 29 degrees Pisces marks the end of a long emotional stretch. Saturn at 0 degrees Pisces begins a quieter, steadier chapter of emotional responsibility. The moon in Aries reminds you that even in transition, you are allowed to move. Nothing about this day demands a dramatic declaration. It is more like standing at the shoreline at dusk. You can feel that the tide has shifted. The water that once covered certain ground has slowly receded. You are not the same as you were at the beginning of this cycle, even if your outer life looks similar. Maybe you are less willing to overextend. Maybe you are more honest about what drains you. Maybe you are ready to let one small pattern end without turning it into a story. The sky does not promise outcomes. It does not predict what comes next. It shows you a moment where awareness and action are finally close enough to touch. If there is anything to carry with you from today, let it be this. You are allowed to slow down before defining direction. You are allowed to feel deeply and still act simply. And you are allowed to take one clear step, even if you don't yet see the entire path. If this reflection resonated, let it settle. Notice what stays with you after the words fade. That quiet clarity is enough for now.